All right, Luka, it is time for us to do game balls and game checks. Game balls, very simple. Who's your MVP from the game? Game checks. Who didn't even need to show up today? We would like to revoke their game check. Luka, who gets your game ball award for the Bills? I should probably mention the final score at some point on this show, shouldn't
26
I?
to 7 win.
26-7 victory over the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I think this might be the most transparent game balls segment we've ever had for an
Already
episode.
given him.
I think we already gave them through this because, yeah, mine's simple. He wears a 4 and a 7 on his jersey. And I think he was just the man who turned this game around and made sure his impact was felt, even in a game where the opposition couldn't throw the ball forward. And his position generally depends on that being a thing in order to make any sort of impact. But he made sure that he could make the plays when they were there to be made, as you highlighted so perfectly with that statement. And I did double check. He did, even on top of it all, have that tackle for loss that I mentioned that made his impact there in the first half. Christian Benford gets my game ball. He was an absolute perfect player out there for this defense. He made the plays that were needed. He flipped this game on its head on the score sheet. And I just, this is the kind of game for a player like him, finally with the contract under his belt and all of those things, and kind of having a little bit down year for where his expectations are. This could be that kind of game that could turn his swagger back, turn his vibes back, and get him going back in those positive directions to be the number one corner we truly need him to be, down the stretch and in the games that matter. So Christian Benford, game ball, absolutely deserved.
Absolutely agree with that choice. Some other guys that could have been mentioned. Joey Bosa had the massive sack and forced fumble. By the way, Thigh Doctor on Twitter speculates that, looking at it back on the TV copy, it's not going to be a severe hamstring injury. He said it's even possible that he get him back for next week, although he speculates that given the fact that they play the Bengals or the Patriots in 2 weeks, he would think that that they'd give him the full 2 weeks off, but he wouldn't expect him to be like out for a month like we've seen with Kincaid. So that's encouraging. James Cook obviously just continues his ascension into the upper echelon of elite running backs, and he is now only 60 yards off of Jonathan Taylor as the NFL leading rusher. 32 carries, 144 yards for Cook, and also led the way with receiving. Not a big number, but 33 yards on 3 catches. James Cook was massive today. Shaq Thompson was a guy that stood out not only for the personality, the leadership, the comments he made early in the week. McDermott called him out about giving a speech to the team early in the week. He said that's something about leadership. Luka and I talked off the air. Shaq Thompson's the best linebacker on this team. You can look at their paychecks. You can look at when they were drafted. Doesn't matter right now. Football games need to be won. He's the best linebacker on this team. Figure everything else out after that point is accepted by everybody involved. Beyond that, nobody else really stands out to me except for the guy that I'm going to choose. On a day when you're down your 2 offensive tackles and you go into Pittsburgh and give up 0 sacks and you set a rushing record for that stadium, I'd love to mention Alec Anderson. I'd love to mention Ryan Vandermark. Hell, I'd love to mention the interior guys because they're playing next to inexperienced players. But the best way to recognize all of those guys is to recognize their coach, Aaron Kromer. I think we've known for a while he's a great coach. He certainly has that track record. But one thing is, if you want to make points against him, is for all that poor injury luck the Bills have had, it really has never impacted the offensive line like it did today. Continuity for that group for the last 2 years has been outstanding. The 5 starters almost always play outside of a game or two from like Spencer Brown or Deion Dawkins here and there. Aaron Kromer brought his A game today, and the offensive line and that rushing attack absolutely won the day. So love giving it to Aaron Kromer. All right, Luka, with the good, there's got to be some bad. Who gets your game check award today?
Ooh, man. It feels tough-ish. I will say this. In this spot, Josh, shout out Ray Davis, because he's not even remotely close to contention
Good
for
call.
this one. He popped when needed. I mean, there was even a moment where Cook had to sub himself off. I think something was going on with his helmet. It wasn't anything health related per se. And the next 2 carries for Ray Davis, who came out there, I think both went for first downs immediately. It was 1st and 10 run for, I want to say it was 12 yards. And then the next one was for 11 yards, whatever it might have been. It was like, oh, Ray Davis wanted to show up and play. 9 carries, 62 yards. That, beautiful thing. 6.9 average. Nice. It's that's great. In this segment, it feels appropriate to shout out Ray Davis. You are not a game check candidate. What I will do though is I will honestly, I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. And I'm gonna just go ahead and say I give it to the entire receiver core.
There you
Just
go.
as a unit. And the reason I do, and the craziest part about it is one of the receivers caught a touchdown on a 4th and goal for this team. And I
If you and
still
I drop that pass in the backyard, we get made fun of by our kids.
correct.
And your
Like
kid's
that
a week old and she's still laughing at you.
week old in 24 hours. We still got time. So when I look at a box score and I see James Cook, who had 32 carries, and all the yards that he had, he also was your leading receiver, both in receptions with 3 and yards, 33. And then next up is Dawson Knox, tied with 3 receptions for 28 yards. And then next after that is Ty Johnson, tied with 3 catches for 20 yards. Where does that lead me? It leads me to the leading receiver being Brandon Cooks. 1 catch, 13 yards. And if you don't remember when that happened, it was on the opening drive for the Bills. When that is your leading wide receiver target line and receiving line, that is a massive problem. Keon Coleman was the only wide receiver to have more than 1 catch. It was 2 for 9 yards and a score. And once again, as Josh highlighted, if any of us dropped that ball, we would be embarrassed. Great catch. You got to make it when it is. Cool. The receivers, once again, was passing needed in this game? Absolutely not. Get it. But I don't come out of this game feeling any better about anything in the passing game as a whole. And primarily the issue does once again feel like that boundary situation. And even for that matter, the slot situation is not great on this roster. Like Khalil Shakir is also starting to highlight himself as maybe you're not actually that. I think Khalil Shakir can be a good, great player. Right now, it's bad. It is just bad. The only slot weapon that exists on this roster was inactive today, and that is Dalton Kincaid. Mind you, Dalton Kincaid is a tight end. Wide receiver is bing, 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 massive problem. Hey, Brandon, call into WGR and tell me once again how this is not a problem. I would love to hear your thoughts. You just signed a guy off the street on Wednesday. He now just led in yards of that entire core. Wide receiver core, to wrap this up with a bow, because I could go on for hours. You are my game check situation. Figure it the F out.
This wide receiver core looked like a group that was missing 3 or 4 of their top players. Unfortunately, they weren't. They were missing one guy. They were missing Joshua Palmer. Now, I do think if you want to be optimistic about the Bills passing game, you can get there. You can say Dalton Kincaid's coming back. There's no more important player in the passing game on the receiving end than Dalton Kincaid when he's healthy. That's a big win because the games he's not healthy is starting to add up. Speaking of guys who can't stay healthy, Luka mentioned this a lot in the summer. I think Joshua Palmer's their best wide receiver. I don't know how much that's saying, but I think Luka, the thing you mentioned is watch out for this guy who can't stay healthy. I think he gets open better than any other receiver they have. Maybe I'll set Brandon Cooks aside for that conversation because I really haven't watched him too closely yet. I think he's the most well-rounded receiver. That includes Khalil Shakir. If he and Kincaid are healthy, I think you have one really good weapon in Kincaid and one respectable weapon in Palmer. And from there, you hope for continued improvement with Brandon Cooks as he integrates himself in the system. And then everybody else, I don't know. You're just not getting much from anybody. I guess Shakir is an okay slot at this point in time. I think the Keon Coleman experiment is about deader than dead. He was very behind in the pecking order today. The reason why I had trouble with it, because I was like, what about Gabe Davis as my game check? But on a day they ran so well, I'm sure Gabe Davis and Tyrell Shaver specifically deserve a lot of credit for that. But I'm with you. The receivers are a problem. There's not a lot of answers coming back. Maybe McCole Hardman comes back and factors into that, but boy, oh boy, it's going to be an interesting offseason. Hopefully it's several weeks into January and February away. My game check award is not necessarily going to be about the Pittsburgh game specifically, but more of a larger point that's been bothering me. I'm going to give it to Jordan Phillips. I don't understand why he's on the 53-man roster. I just don't. I loved Jordan Phillips early in his Bills career. 2019, 2020, 2021. He's a juice guy. He's a great personality. People get a kick out of him wearing the big coat on the sideline. The problem is in 2025 he's not a good football player. And it's not like that the Bills have, Pat Williams in his prime as an option there, but we've seen things out of Zion Logue. We know that Morgan Fox is a player that can be helpful. TJ Sanders is playing defensive end, for God's sake. Can we get TJ Sanders playing defensive tackle? Jordan Phillips played 13 snaps today against the Steelers. That's a waste of an activation. I don't understand why he is active on this roster. I don't know what he brings to this roster. Unlike Jordan Phillips of years past, where you'd have splash play games and then games where he disappears, now you're just seeing games where he disappears. So I need Jordan Phillips to go away, respectfully, back to the practice squad where he belongs, where he can be that street clothes. You can wear your coat on the sideline, just not under a jersey.